And we are live here to chat about all of the TV that we've watched in the last 2 weeks. No, the background is not thematic and in honor of people dying underwater in a submarine right now. This is our background every week, but it did make me think of that. So, cheers. How are you guys doing, Kate and Carey? How has your week/weeks been? And do you bring any news to us this week?
This week has felt like a month already. I'm ready for the weekend. Got a wedding to get to.
Ooh, I'm a big wedding fan. Cheers. Enjoy.
That is the plan.
Exciting. Kate, what about you? How are you doing in lovely Kate land over there?
Haven't been doing much, just kind of some family things to kind of help take care of, but nothing big, nothing special. But it's been pretty good.
Awesome. And either of you bring us any news this week? I'll start. The Bridgerton Penelope Collins season, I guess it's technically season three, even though there was like kind of a season 3A with Queen Charlotte, which is like not Bridgerton, but you know what I mean. It's coming out in December. I'm literally beside myself. I'm so excited. I'm so ready to get wildly disappointed and trodden on once again. I'm ready for that pain. How are you guys feeling about that? And do you have any other news?
Well, I have two bits of news, which sort of leads into what we'll be talking about tonight
I
about
don't have any
Superman
other
and Lois.
news, but predictably,
I'm going to take this opportunity to mention a very not well kept secret. And that's the fact that for absolutely no explainable reason, there's like a 10-second delay, and Kate just braves through it somehow, some way. And we all just kind of like cover it up. Now you know the truth, and I will turn it over to either Carey in 1 second or Kate in 10 seconds. Let's see what happens.
Ladies first.
uh, I don't have any other news. I am looking forward to being desperately disappointed and frustrated with coming up. There is several different book series previously mentioned that are kind of in the production, but there's not really any update or book series to TV or movie adaptations that are not really making much difference other than they're there. And I've already talked about them before, so I'm excited about that. And that's all the news I have.
Well, the big news obviously is what Superman and Lois is obviously what we'll be talking about a little bit later. But we will get a season four, truncated season 10 episodes. On the downside is if you aren't a Kent, you're probably not going to be in the show next year. I mean, they basically reduced the cast for the most part to the Kent family and Lex Luthor, and everyone else is essentially either a guest cast person or whatever featured guest. And so some folks, I guess no one knows like who's really sort of going to take the bait and say, you know what, I'll come back as a guest star, or someone who's going to say, you know what, I'm going to take my chances and see what other gigs I can get. Um, so yeah, that's it in a nutshell. A whole lot of shakeup. Good news and bad news at the same time.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, not to be like cold hearted, but when I first heard that, I was like, good, fantastic, no new friends. Like, just like the old CW part of me that was like, back to the original cast. That sounds fantastic. Rose up, unsummoned. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, wait, but I like John Henry and Natalie, and I like Lana, and I like pretty much everybody except Kyle. You know what I mean? Like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is just a testament to this show and how good it is at all of these, like side characters and such, side characters slash like main leading characters these last few seasons that I actually do care. And there's really only like a handful that I'd be like, oh yeah, for sure, they can go for other screen time. So cheers. And also, I'm sure I'm still going to wildly enjoy this last truncated season. So, is what it is. We win either way.
Absolutely.
Well, you touched on Superman and Lois. I just finished watching this week's Superman and Lois. Let's just jump right into it. What did you think of the episode that boldly asked the question, what if Lex Luthor was just way more like Thanos and Palpatine? Like, what if? What did you think?
I will right off the bat, I will tell you this. For what, this one episode, I really, really dig what they're doing with this Lex Luthor. Dude is a menace. Dude has some gravity. He's he's absolutely positively scary to me, right? And we haven't seen a Lex Luthor like that on camera, on screen. I want to say in probably a long time, but I'm thinking to myself, have we ever seen a Lex Luthor like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, who's sort of like Lois and Clark, has some like miles on the tread also, right? So it's not like he's an up and coming Lex. He's like a Lex who's been around for a while, who got wrong, and now is on a warpath. And so I'm just really, really excited to see what he's going to bring. I'm legitimately scared for everybody who's in his sights. Legitimately.
Yeah, the announcement of, a bunch of people aren't returning. It's like super sad, like Vanessa Hudgens' voice. Like people are gonna die or whatever. But it couldn't have come at a better time because now we're all scared for our favorites. Like now we're like, okay, who's actually leaving versus like who's going to have some sort of gut-wrenching death at the end of this season. It's bad, but it's interesting. It makes for a great show and it makes for a good villain. And for a villain that's introduced, prominently this late in the season, I think they did that introduction so well. It wasn't just a matter of aging up Lex, because we saw what I would consider to be a somewhat aged up Lex in Supergirl as well. It's also the way they did it, the grizzled nature, the way he's speaking, the way he's presenting this incarnation of Lex is such a perfect balance or foil, I suppose, to this version of Superman and Lois. So smart, very intimidating, very fascinating to watch. It's good when I like both the heroes and the villains. So I was a happy camper this week.
And I think you're sort of like, he's an amalgamation of both Thanos and Palpatine is perfect, right? Because
Thank you.
he has he has sort of this, like, to him at least, this sort of righteous crusade on his part, because he's had 17 years of his life taken away. Sure, he may be a terrible, horrible human being, but those 17 years were taken away for like no fault of his own, at least in that sense, right? And then, of course, we get to see his machinations while he's in prison. He's in there for 5 minutes and takes over the place. In an incredibly, like, in not in a way that where it's like, hey, I have to flex my muscles. It's like, no, we're going to do this pretty succinctly and with a lot of thought. And he's had 17 years to think about getting back at Lois and Clark, man, and Superman and everyone else. That's a lot of time to be thinking, and it's like, it's gonna be a bloodbath. It really is.
It is, and I really like how they specifically gave him motivation to go after both Lois and Clark. He has a unique vendetta against each one of them, which was really smart and set up right off the bat. His dynamic with each of them is unique. So it's not just, and I love seeing Superman and Lois be a team. Love that 10 out of 10. But it's not just a matter of him opposing the team of them. He has a unique vendetta against each of them. And if we think back to like the comics, and I know that's me saying if we think back to the comics, but if we do, there is a very interesting dynamic and rivalry slash, hero villain pairing between Lex and Lois that is completely unique from the dynamic between Lex and Clark. So it's nice to see that that take shape. That was a very thoughtful moment to sort of bring it in and to set that tone. Stormy in the chat says, I feel for the cast of Superman and Lois. It's such a slap in the face to their work. It is always sad when someone has to go. Again, Vanessa Hudgens' voice. Yeah, like people are gonna die or whatever. But they've got a great legacy left with this show. It's gonna be okay. It's only 10 episodes. We all of us have seen our fave, die or leave before the final season, and sometimes we end up watching the final season being like, yeah, maybe it's okay that they're not having to suffer through this. With that being said, let's talk side characters. As hard as that is, we saw a lot of parent-child fighting this last episode. We get to see the fun dynamic of, oh, I hate this, and then the parent intervenes, and the kid's like, no, not like that. How dare you, parent me? I'm basically an adult. You embarrassed me, which is always fun and fresh. I feel for the kids in that situation and the adults in that situation. What did you think of those parallel storylines?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the thing and I can see it from both sides. I think we all sort of can, right? If you're a parent and you see a situation going south for your kid, you sort of want to step in and sort of see what you can do to fix it. And the question always is, well, how do you go about doing that? And I think it sort of speaks to how the parents see their kids, right? Because I think I don't want to say that like Clark and Jonathan's relationship is strained, but it's not the same as it was at the very beginning of the show, right? And so I think if you take out all of the other things that Clark's dealing with, like a wife who's dealing with cancer and all these other things that he's dealing with, he probably would have taken an attack to say, well, you know what, Jonathan, you need to sort of step up and let Kyle know how, he should be like, hey, this is like a situation that you have to sort of set straight. And I think that would have probably been the better approach for both of them. But it's also as a parent, you just sort of, particularly when it's all around the secret of Superman, sort of a problem or an issue that Clark created, is probably he feels like it's a solution that he should make also. And so he may have overstepped his bounds. As far as like the situation with like Lana and Sarah and Jordan, now I think she was absolutely right. You got to step in that situation when you have a daughter who's as fragile as in such a fragile place as she's in,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with like a teenage kid with superpowers who seems to like have this attitude problem. It's like, no, we don't need to take a slow approach to this. We need to handle this right away. So I think Clark could have stepped back, but I'm all with Lana for stepping up quickly.
Yeah, it's tricky because on the one hand, like, I would hate to agree with Kyle on literally anything ever. And yet, when he was, talking to little Wonder Twin number 2 and saying, hey, if you've got a problem at your job, you should bring it to me first, kind of thing. That's great advice. And that's exactly what kids are supposed to be learning from internships, anyways, is like how to handle like a workplace dynamic or how to take a, question or request to an authority figure. And like, if a kid had a late teen or however old he is has like a parent come to their employer, they should rightfully be told like, hey, don't do this again, this is a bad idea, like whatever. So I'm like on Kyle's side, which feels toxic and I dislike that, but unfortunately that was the reality of this episode, and it's probably the first time ever in this entire series that I've had to agree with Kyle. I do have to say it did feel a little forced having Clark go to him. It felt like something the Clark we've been introduced to the last few seasons, would have known not to do. He's familiar with this town. He's familiar with these environments. He's familiar with, things like firefighter departments and just like generally like internship. Like there's not like a
Right,
cultural thing where he wouldn't get that aspect. So that felt a little
right.
forced.
See, I disagree in that only because again, it is sort of an issue that Clark created for Jonathan, right? So basically revealing himself to Kyle that he's Superman, right? So I think if it's a situation where, say, take Superman out of it, right? If it's a situation where Jonathan was upset at the hazing and the teasing and the things that he was getting because that's just how firehouses work, I think Clark would have said to Jonathan, hey, this is an issue that you need to straighten out yourself, right?
Hmm.
But if it's an issue because he's treating you differently because of who I am and it's a problem that I created, then I feel like, then I think that's why Clark took the step of saying, hey, I need to go straighten this out. I think he would have stepped back otherwise, but in this particular case, I felt like he needed to sort of step up and do it himself. I wouldn't say it was the right thing to do, but I just think he felt that responsibility.
That makes sense because your point is well taken that he is addressing an issue that he caused with his child's employer. Yes, technically a family friend, blah blah blah, but he did initially cause that, so he was following that. I get that. That makes sense. Nonetheless, I was still forced to agree with Kyle on like, don't do that again. Don't have your dad come to me if I'm the one semi-employing you or what have you. I Sarah made a comment this episode that she is just kind of over it. That feels like the kind of line that they give somebody who is potentially on the chopping block. So that leads into my question. Who do you really think is potentially on the chopping block, and who might we get as a little, cameo return in season 4?
Well, here's the easy answer, right? And I'm not going to take credit for this because Jeff over in a pod had this theory, and I tend to agree with it. But it feels like it would be an easy opportunity to move the Kent family back to Smallville, right? I mean to Metropolis,
Mm-hmm.
because I can't imagine even with Lex basically having it in for Lois and Clark, I just don't see him hanging around Smallville to do it, even though that's where they live, right? He's got to set up some sort of base of operations, and I have to imagine it's going to be in Metropolis.
Mm-hmm.
So to take him on, it just feels like it's an easy opportunity to move the family back to Metropolis to sort of deal with that head on and in sort of a better way. It's an easy way to isolate the Kent family and then bring in sort of everybody else, sort of like in guest starring capacities if they need to. Having said all that, in terms of like folks who might not show up again, I think um, Sam, um, I could see Sam being like a fatal casualty of some sort,
Mm-hmm.
particularly with Bizarro looming around. I could see that. I could see him being on the chopping block as being he might not make it. Um, I don't feel like they're going to kill anyone else off unless it's a situation where, say, Kyle finds himself like in a deadly fire or some sort of life or death situation. Maybe something like that happens where it's like either Superman Jr. was like in a position to save him, but he's like, I can't do this anymore because I can't expose my secret. That sort of deal. I could see those two characters biting the dust for some reason. Um, but I think it's just an easier situation to physically isolate the Kent family by taking them to Metropolis. That way, even still, you might not have to kill anyone off. But
Yeah.
I think that's just a cleaner way to do it.
I love that theory. And it'll bring back some or bring in, I guess I should say, some fresh blood, some people that they knew from back there and that kind of thing. And then you get a bit of a choice at the end of this abbreviated season of whether they want to stay in Metropolis, find, shiny new waters, or go back to Smallville. And I think we know the answer to that. One last
Yeah.
question. Stormy in the chat says, do you think Superman and Lois could get a season 5?
Short answer, no.
I agree.
Um, Not with James Gunn preparing to make his Superman movie. I just don't see them doing a parallel when they've drawn clear lines between what it is that they want to do and sort of everything else. It was sort of really evident in like the Flash movie, but it's been evident since they've came on board. It's like, you know what, we're going to do what we're going to do and sort of bring everything under one umbrella. and everything else is being weeded away. So I don't see them getting a fifth season. To be honest, I think creatively it's better for the show if they go into this final season expecting it to be their last, having 10
Agreed.
episodes, and they can just tell one really good story.
Agreed. I think they're gonna wrap it up, and I think that this is an appropriate time to wrap it up. I think this is a show that could have gone 5 full seasons, and 5 full seasons would have been the appropriate end. 4 seasons, still fine. The fact that the last one is abbreviated is mitigated by the fact that they know in advance that it's the final season. So that's a good trade off. 4 full versus 4 abbreviated, knowing it's final. I would take 4 abbreviated, knowing it's final. But it's within that range of appropriate length for this show. And I think the fact that they've stayed so strong seasons 1 through 3 with limited complaints other than like my ongoing grudge against Kyle, whatever. It's a really good, respectable run for a show, especially in, not to sound like 84 years old, but especially in this day and age when shows don't get that many seasons. A lot of shows hit the chopping block after season 2. First of all, a lot of pilots get made that never even, get out there. Then a lot of
Absolutely.
shows get like a burn off semi season 1. A lot of shows get a season 1 you never hear from them again. There's just so many places where early shows don't make it to their full potential. And I think for this show, it's not that I'm saying they've made their full potential for seasons, one of which is somewhat shorter, but given the other like DC extended universe limitations, time limitations, making a show during COVID, like all of that, they made a really strong, respectable kind of portfolio of episodes. I guess I'll say that whole thing sounded absolutely like I was reading off an email, but I stand behind it.
Well, absolutely. And the other thing that sort of like puts a good timestamp on this show, and we don't think about it a whole lot, is that they have teenage kids who are like 15, 16 years old. So eventually they're going to graduate high school, right?
Yeah.
So are you trying to have a show where it's like, hey, they're in college and someone comes visiting on the weekend, or we're
Right.
following the adventures of super young teen boy? You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think it sort of has a natural, particularly when it's a family drama, it has sort of a natural endpoint in terms of what this family is about right now. So,
Agreed. Yeah. They both in terms of the parents and the kids, they've got a really limited window of being able to like pull off this age range. And that leads us into a discussion of very, very different parents and kids. And I've noted this in the agenda as a reprise, as it were. Now, you might recall for about 30 seconds at the end of our last live, Kate was
Mhm.
chatting about all of the amazing things that she watched and read, and she happened to mention Shiny Happy People, which is a documentary on Amazon Prime, boo, Jeff Bezos, about the Duggar family. And Kate's never given a bad recommendation in her life, so immediately I went and watched it. And as you can see in the title of tonight's live, we're going to chat about it again because Kate, I am guessing you have more than 30 seconds thoughts, and I know I do. So let's just record scratch, throw in a little reprise here.
Yeah, so I'm to kind of give the precursor disclaimer. I'm pretty careful and cautious about what I say about real people and real things happening versus my fictional opinions. That
That's
being
good. I'm not.
said, no. Uh, that being said, I feel comfortable in saying that I was sort of aware of the Duggar situation. Um, I had in my childhood received books like by the Duggars or whatever,
Mhm.
as a young Southern woman would, and kind of read one or two of them, was kind of like, this is weird, and moved on with my life. Uh, in the past few years, obviously, the news has kind of come to light that there's a little bit more than just ankle length skirts and 19 children, and that there's a bit of a there it's not a bit, there is some malicious background behind the religious upbringing that they had. And by no means do I think all of the children in that family have any malicious intent, but I think that the system they were raised in can breed that. And this documentary was a thorough examination of what that was like, while also trying to be as courteous as they could be to the people who were made victim of that system.
You know what really frustrated me, but also just had me absolutely on the edge of my seat in this documentary? They had
Wow.
actual people, who were part of the Duggar family. We saw the kids, some of which were, really, unfortunately, quite close to a lot of the, kind of crimes and tragedies that occurred within the family. And you see them, even the cousin, actually, and the cousin carried this documentary on her back, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
The like kind of like fun, rebellious cousin who wasn't at all, part of this sort of weird fundamentalist cult. But once you listen to them talk for more than like an episode or two, it was like, there's still something going on there, isn't there? The trappings of all of this propaganda, lies, whatever you want to call it, that the indoctrination they were brought up around, these just little slips of like, oh yeah, my parent, one of the sisters was talking, my parents were worried about, you know that if you went to school, you would learn about blah, 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 blah. So we had this curriculum that was basically not a curriculum. We didn't learn anything at all because they were worried about, kids getting brainwashed at school, which like, I guess could happen. And then they keep going on. I'm like, hold on, hold on. There's just little pockets of what they're still holding on to. Respectability as well with the fun cousin, like when her husband was trying to say like, the Duggar mom's voice, Michelle, whatever, is like very obviously stylized to sound like a child, and this is part of pedophilia culture, whatever. And Fun Cousin is like, oh, yeah, I know it drives you. There's just little things where I'm like, you're close enough to fully, make this documentary, but you still see these like trappings holding on. It's a
Mm-hmm.
fascinating like human character study.
I agree. I watch documentaries every once in a while. Normally, they're history documentaries, so it's less about current events, and it's more just like what facts are they going to mention.
Mm-hmm.
But when I do watch documentaries about more current events, normally I feel like they've actually included too much. They've drug out things that they repeated facts, and they've made it feel like it was a dragging on process, almost to make you feel a certain way because you've just been drowning in the whole thing. This to the opposite thing, where there was things that I was like, wait, whoa, we could have spent a little, like, it was thorough in the sense of like we covered a lot of different topics.
Right.
It was not thorough in like we just said a thing and then we moved on. And I was like, whoa,
It's
hold
like,
on.
let's do this really intense character study where you get like invested in these people and want to understand everything about them. And then, whoop, by the way, we got to move right past that because these people were trying to plot to take over the world, not an exaggeration. And that's kind of more important, which, like, fair, it is important, more important. However, it was like a really fascinating character study as well. It very much gave the energy of like the world is ending, but you also still are like wanting to root for, one individual person's like character development.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just entranced by that documentary in the worst way, obviously. Terrible,
Mm-hmm.
awful. Heart goes out to everybody involved in that or impacted by, that practice, that culture.
Mm-hmm. I did a little bit more reading about the documentary afterwards. Not a ton, but just enough to know that there was apparently dozens and dozens more hours worth of content that the initial direction wanted to use, but lawyers basically said, "Hey, no, you can't do that because of the possible problems that this could cause." So I feel like they said as much as they could say without getting in trouble and causing more legal issues than they were willing to take on. That being said, if there was that much more footage, that much more discussion, there's clearly something else going on too that wasn't even covered. And if they weren't willing to cover that, but they were willing to cover the stuff that was in the documentary, it boggles the mind and hurts the heart to possibly imagine what could be left unsaid.
How many
Absolutely.
episodes is this documentary?
It's 4.
4. Yep.
Like a couple hours long?
Yeah.
It's like 45-minute episodes each, I
Okay.
believe.
Yeah.
It was a pretty short watch for a series.
It's just the wildest, like, first of all, I knew a lot about this, right? Like, for all the same reasons Kate listed, like through osmosis, if you're close enough to a cult, you start to, learn the workings of a cult, right? I say with like respect or disrespect, whichever, right? But
Mhm.
the whole thing starts with this sort of like, oh, look at this like quirky, cute family that just like has so many kids. Isn't that crazy? And like they're Christian, yeah, but like, isn't everybody teehee? And then there's like, a TLC show and it's all just like fun and fresh. And like, okay, sure, like long denim skirts, like a little weird, but like we've all seen worse, right? They're like, it's 2023, they're in style again, whatever, right? And it just starts from there. And then by the end of it, it's like, this was literally a plot to take over world governments. This is literally like this whole huge, like long term, multi generational, transparent plan to do all that. And it's like, first of all, when you're hearing like some of this stuff through osmosis as like children, right? Like just like kids don't interrogate every single thing they hear to the same degree when it's laid out like this and you're like, wait, I have heard that term before. Wait, in this circle I do hear them say this or believe it. Wild. Over the course of 4 episodes they make that transition. It's a
Mhm.
whole roller coaster.
Well, and the framing and the little bit of advertisement I saw about it, and even the first episode or two, it's very much framed on we're going to focus on just the Duggars and specifically the older sisters and the stuff that they went through
Mm-hmm.
because of this mystery man, quote unquote, and the brother.
Mm-hmm.
And they do mainly focus on that, but then they'll every once in a while mention like the elite force of young men that was supposed to take over the world. And then they would just switch topics. I was like, whoa, like
I feel
this
like
is awful,
you just
but
showed a whole militia.
you just like yes, the personal tragedy that is happening to these women is a full story upon itself and deserves the time to really talk about it. But so does that story. What
Right.
the heck?
What?
And I think that was it's wild, and I think that was probably the bigger parts that they had to take out because of the legal things, which makes me, all types of feelings, but it was an interesting watch that left me not feeling great, but left me with a lot of questions.
Right. Like the trigger warning everything. Sexual assault, child
Mhm.
sexual assault, grooming, incest, like every kind of thing you can imagine. Trigger warning on that explicitly talked through. So what did they take out? Question mark.
Mhm.
Also, again, they left in the documentation of the literal multi-generational plot to take over the US and other world governments. So I'm once again asking what they took out of this thing. Again, steal it on Amazon Prime, and enjoy.
Why does this sound like some kind of plot that would have been like on a Marvel Disney Plus? It could have been like the story for like Secret Invasion with Nick Fury trying to like stop this family that was like made of scrolls, but they were also trying to take over the world. Same thing, right? So why not?
Well, and like I previously mentioned it, but I went ahead and finished it since then. The whole series of Silo, which is the TV show that's on Apple TV right now. Uh, the book series is but the whole concept is they build these silos, and one silo thinks it's like each silo thinks it's the only silo in existence, and that they're the only people left in the world, and all this stuff, and they're generations of thinking this way, except you find out not as many generations, this, that, and the other. But there were certain things about that where it's super, super controlled, and it's this super authoritarian system meant to control these people because of the decisions of government and all this stuff. I was like, and this is sci-fi, and this feels less creepy than what I just watched with the documentary. So
No, literally, like the Sons of Liberty on Supergirl and like all those kind of things. Anytime they try to show like a religious nationalist cult in fiction, it never touches reality. It's never anywhere close. And I know with this particular one with Shiny Happy People, we're talking about like a very specific branch of like uh, American evangelical Christians from X time with X beliefs in with like X execution of those beliefs, whatever. But I, like you don't have to look far or be like a, cult scientist or whatever to know that there's like any number of like religious cults or religious nationalism found in most, I would say, like major world religions have some sort of like weird religious extremist, whatever, and they account for X percentage of total whatever, like you can find so many examples of this, and the real life ones, this is just one area where where fiction never even comes close. No like fictional like cult weirdness touches reality. I don't know if they think it's like too much of a stretch or what, but well, on a lighter note, Stormy in the chat says, Cammien saw the last season of Never Have I Ever. Loved everything but Ben. He's just like Dawson Leary. I believe that's a character from Dawson's Creek. Dobby should have gone with Paxton or been single. I fully agree. I think Ben is so bottom of the barrel. However, it was true to form because this is Mindy Kaling's therapy related to some little shrimp she met on The Office, and we're all just subject to it, and it just becomes more enjoyable, much like Bridgerton, when you just make your peace with it of like, this is I'm not going to get what I want, and I'm not going to get the best possible outcome, and I'm just going to find a way to enjoy it anyways, and that's the best advice I can give. And I will not be following my advice. I will be complaining, by the way. Carey, let's talk about let's just continue this conversation of controversial topics. In the last week-ish, a fun new DC piece of entertainment came out, and that was The Flash. We've talked about that a lot on the show before in the news, talking about the Flash movie in particular. And if there's anybody I trust to look on the bright side and find the good without bullshitting me, it's Carey. So Carey, I want to hear from you why I should watch The Flash.
Okay. First of all, I'll say this. Let me get out of the box. I do recommend watching this movie. It is a weird and strange movie because it occupies like a really weird place for DC. It's like, quote unquote, the end of like Zack Snyder's like watch, but it also isn't like definitively ushering in James Gunn's like DC, right? So it's like the 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 battle that you have to have for people when you tell them about this movie is like, do I need to see it? Does it matter, right? Because does it tie to anything? Does it tie anything up? Does it lead to anything else? And the answer to that question is probably no on both accounts, but I had fun watching it. Here's something I didn't think I was going to say out loud, right? Ezra Miller was. I went to this movie because I liked Michael Keaton's Batman. I expected to go into this movie thinking, okay, I get to see Michael Keaton as Batman again, which is fantastic. but Ezra Miller was really, really good in this movie, right? This isn't a spoiler because we know he's playing sort of two different characters, right? But it's like in most situations like that, it's like obviously there's camera work involved, and it's sort of like a novelty that you sort of like have to deal with for a short period of time with like a character playing two different versions of himself. But this goes on for like the second and third act of the movie. And the best thing that I can say about his performances is that there was a clear delineation and differentiation between both characters, right? Not just the least of which is that they look different. It's like one of those things where you sort of watch a movie and you get lost into the performance of like, no, these are two different people, but it's just one Ezra Miller, right? And so I say all that to say Ezra Miller had a really, really good performance, and I did not think I'd be able to say that out loud with obviously all of the baggage that comes with that. But he was really, really good in this movie. Um, I think the issue with this movie is, like I said before, it comes at a weird, and it's like, what is the purpose of this movie? What is it supposed to do? Because it was sold as this is a movie that basically gets to reset what the DC movie universe is going to be. You could sort of take all the things that you really love about what's happened before. You can get rid of some of the things that didn't work, and then you can also bring in new elements of things that you want to sort of explore into the future. And on the bright side of that, it sounds like they may be doing that with Sasha Callier,
Hmm.
who played Supergirl, who was fantastic in the role. Didn't get enough to do, um, but she was really good in it, and so hopefully she gets to do more. So at least there's that element of it. Um, there were tons and tons and tons of DC cameos from like sort of like all sorts of different movies and television and all those sort of good things. And so they did those things really well. CGI for how they did all that is an entirely different story. It did not look the greatest. But if you listen to the director, he'll say that that's on purpose. I don't know if I agree with that. Um, the biggest problem that I've had with like multiverse movies, right, is that it gets to a point of does what happen does what happen in these things does it matter, right? Because if you're dealing with the multiverse, if a character dies, does that matter? If a character has growth, does it matter? Is this character that they brought in going to carry over to anything else that they do? Is this just like a ha gotcha, look at this person, but it's not going to mean anything. And that's not just an issue the Flash has. It's an issue that happened with Doctor Strange movies.
Hmm.
It's not so much an issue with what they've done with the Spider-Man animated movies. Those things have been freaking spectacular. But I think it gets to a point of when people are so inundated with multiverse stories, it's like, well, does any of this matter?
Hmm.
And with the Flash, the answer is some of it does, some of it not so much. The biggest issue that I think the Flash has was as far as Barry's story in this movie, it was basically a story that sets him up to learn an important lesson, which we finally get to, and he sort of finally accepts.
Hmm.
And then at the very end of the movie, they basically, when I say they, the writers and directors sort of throw pie into the audience face because it's like, hey, we spent these last 2 hours learning this lesson, and then it ain't that big of a deal. And it's like at the end, right? So it's like, why did I spend all this time and investment in a character learning a lesson that's important to his growth? And then at the very end of the movie, you sort of pretend like that huge, significant message doesn't matter. I think that's probably the biggest weakness narratively that
Hmm.
the movie has, but I still had fun watching it. I think the biggest problem that DC and the folks made about this was that they sold this as, hey, this is like one of the best, like um, one of the best superhero comic book movies that they'd ever seen, and that's not the case. I think it's really good. I think if you had sold it as, hey, this is really good, this is interesting, this is fun, that would have been different. But to be honest, this movie had so much baggage that it would have been a miracle for it to have been like um, a significant billion-dollar kind of movie, and that has as much to do with Ezra Miller. It has as much to do with the story. It has as much to do with the state of DC. And I think you put DC on something, and the average person just says, "Yeah, I'll pass." And I don't know what they're going to have to be able to do to get beyond the stink of what DC has on it. But if anybody can do it, it's going to be James Gunn. But I just think it has to be a situation where we finally see what his vision is. And The Flash isn't it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's no fault of The Flash. It just comes at a time when basically you're trying to turn around the Titanic, and they're sort of the tail, and the thing is going down, and it's like, well, that's your fate, right? But I say all that to say I still have fun watching it, and I would recommend someone go watch it if they just want to go have fun. But I certainly understand if someone says, "Well, I just can't support Ezra Miller," and I understand that too. I didn't go to the movie to support him; I went to the movie to support everyone else. And if it gets to a point where they decide to recast him or never move forward with him again, it's not going to be any skin off my back.
So for somebody like me, I'm pretty easy to convince to like watch a trash DC movie. Like I'll talk a good game about The Flash, but I'm eventually going to watch it. And the things that you've listed that make me want to watch it, the fact that it's fun, I think, that's something DC does well, fun rather than like we got some, SNL rejects to throw a couple jokes in our script at exactly point 3, 6, and 9. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
I like that it takes some risks, including bad CGI, I guess. Like, I don't know, the kids are into Twilight again, so maybe everybody's into bad CGI these days. I don't know. It's all of that works. And I personally don't even mind the whole like, oh, it's supporting somebody who's trash. I think my issue on the Ezra front is more so how DC handled rolling out this film and kind of brushing everything under the rug and giving Ezra 5 billion chances to the point of like disrespecting victims while at the same time discontinuing, like slowing down progress on the Wonder Woman, legacy and, things like that. So that's my issue, but I'm going to watch it anyways. I am curious for somebody like Kate. So, Kate, you love yourself and therefore did not watch The Flash after X amount of time. I make that joke, but like honestly, there were some highs, there were some lows, right? So you didn't watch the Flash TV show. You've been moderately selective on the DC TV content and movie content that you've watched. You watched some, but not all. So for somebody like you who I would say you're like in sort of their target audience of you're not an automatic yes to watch the movie, but you have enough interest in terms of you're the age range that they're targeting, probably. I don't know. You're,
Mhm.
somebody who's familiar with comics and comic renditions. What questions would you have for Carey or, just anybody with sense who watched the movie, like Carey, as to what you want to know is there for you to be somebody who'd watch it? That was a really long focus group question.
Yeah, it was a long focus question. So to kind of like look at it and to make a small reference, I am of course the target audience. All I want to watch is shirtless men. I'm so sorry, that's a joke only for Cammien. Um, uh, so I haven't. I've made my
There
my
was one in The
adoration
Flash.
for. I've made my admiration for Henry Cavill pretty clear before. I love Henry Cavill. That being said, I've actually never seen him as Superman. I have not seen any of the most recent like DC movies except the first Wonder Woman.
You
Love
like
that
Henry
movie.
Cavill because he's nerdy, not because he's shirtless.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. You know me so well. Um, the the thing about Wonder Woman is it was done so well, but nothing has been marketed in any way that has made me go, oh, I'm going to go see that. The Batman was the only other movie that I wanted to go see. Haven't had a chance to see it yet. Need to figure that one out. Um, I think what does pull me more towards the DC, and I tend to say I like DC more, is because I like that tone of movies more. I like the balance of serious and humor in a way that's not the canned Marvel way. And I think part of that aversion is because we've seen so much Marvel. I mean, there's so many movies of Marvel, and they all have a very similar tone and humor. Um, for me, for them to get to me to watch the DCs more religiously, I think they need to do something different. They need to they don't need to follow in the footsteps of Marvel, and they don't need to necessarily uh, make a remake of their last version of the DC either. It doesn't need to be the completely dark and gritty. I think what's killing a lot of the shows right now is their lackluster attempt at multiverse, of cross movie team ups, of time travel. I'm gonna say it again. Of all the DC and Marvel media, I think Shield did the best version of multiverse and time travel, and nobody's gonna top it. I'm so sorry. It's just not gonna happen. So I think if they go the approach, and it's kind of like the breadcrumbs of what I'm getting or what I'm hearing without actively looking, is it looks like they're going to be doing kind of the Superman and Lois style of origin stories, where it's a more pulled back, lower CGI. We're really looking into what made these people become heroes, and we get several movies of them by themselves, or maybe them and one other person in that movie, before we ever go back into the team ups. Like, we need to get back to the early Marvel movies where they didn't really talk to each other all that much. And if it was a Superman movie, it was Superman, and hey, he might call up his friend Batman for one phone call, and that was it. Instead of, it's the Flash movie, but the allure for, like, for Carrie's instance, was the Batman. And so I think if they were going to try to get me specifically, tell stories of what makes these people heroes before we ever see them like team up and save the world over and over and over again.
Mhm.
That's interesting because you sound like a recently shirtless guy who had sort of this same sort of sentiment, and that was Chris Hemsworth, um, who sort of said the same thing, that sort of like we have all these superhero movies and shows, and it always seems to be about what sort of world saving event do they have to deal with, as opposed to getting to the root of what this character is about, what makes them tick, and to your point, what makes them a hero, right? Um, I will say that, in my opinion, I think The Flash sort of did a little bit of that, but didn't go as far as they needed to go. It's a movie that's like a little over 2 hours long. I feel like it should have been a bit longer, because this isn't a spoiler. The big deal about the Flash, and the thing about the Flash, is that he has the same sort of sense of loss that Batman has, right?
Mhm.
And it's funny because I don't think that so many people sort of think of it that way. They just sort of see Batman, he lost his parents, and he's brooding, and that's why he's a hero. It's sort of the same reason that Barry Allen is a hero, or wants to be a hero. I just don't know that any show or movie has done enough about that story that sort of like expresses that, right? And I think it was one of the failings that I saw in the Flash TV show, is because to a great degree he saw how the justice system, how it was set up, was not set up in a situation that could help him in such a significant situation. So him being a forensic scientist and being the Flash was a way for him to sort of help people that the system could not always help. But we never really saw that in that. And I think that was a big failure that that show had. And I think it's sort of a failure that most shows and most movies don't get right about him. And so it would have been helpful, I think, to get more of that. But that's sort of like in a movie, you want to see the spectacle, right? In a television show, I think you can get more to that. But I think if you take the approach of we have to show what makes these gods amongst men mortal, I think that brings more people in. I think that's sort of why Marvel is more successful because these are characters that we can all sort of see ourselves in.
Mhm.
DC is tougher to do because they are literally gods in metas, save for Batman, which is probably why Batman is probably the most successful out of all of
I don't disagree, but at the same time, I do think that there is a history of DC taking really bold risks that failed. Like, not like they took a risk and people didn't get it and like it was just above them, but like, no, they took a risk and it went badly. And there was like a series of that where it didn't do as well as what Marvel was doing, but it was taking more risks. And I kind of respect them for that. And I think with this Flash film, what I don't know and what I won't know until I see it necessarily is whether this is another continuation where they're taking a risk, you know, by sticking with this literal criminal, right? uh, Groomer, abuser, I don't know what all Ezra has been convicted of or whatever. But they took a risk and went with like a real movie star, you know, the criminal kind. And is that going to pay off, you know, with the storyline choices and risky choices, like totally, definitely, intentionally having bad CGI and having everything right on cameos rather than your lead and what, you know, like, is it going to be something that is, while not as good technically as Marvel, maybe more interesting or, you know, pushing the line a bit forward?
And yeah, I absolutely agree. If we feel as an audience that these things that this studio or these people are doing are intentional
Yeah.
rather than, hey, well, we'll just see what works. If it feels intentional, that's an entirely different thing.
Yeah. Well, speaking of intentional, an intentionally excellent show available to consume this summer is Cruel Summer. Yes, the Taylor Swift single from Lover is being re-released as a radio single or whatever, but I'm in fact referring to the TV show that I won't shut up about. It is just as good as you're imagining or better. It is getting so good. It's set in this like late 1990s, you know, when computer hackers would put on their like big ear things and like hack away and keyboards made loud clacky noises and you know it's so good. It's a murder mystery where you're kind of sort of maybe on the side of the villains, but I'm gonna do that anyways because that's just how I am. I have also been watching, catching up on Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which I believe is over. But that and not DC inspired my side part tonight. The fashion on Miss Maisel is just chef's kiss. So good. I'm moving quickly because we're already 11 minutes over, but I was very excited to hear about the Flash movie and very excited to talk about Shiny Happy People. So I'm very glad that we got to go talk about both of those two things as well as Superman and Lois. Thank you both for sticking around a couple extra minutes with me. And thank you, Stormy in the chat, and anybody else watching for coming along on the ride. I will see you all in 2 weeks. You guys know what's going to be around in 2 weeks? You guys know what's going to be around in 2 weeks? The Witcher is going to be
We
around
are.
in 2 weeks. That's right. Bye.